Let's talk about Alice in Wonderland. So, Whole Cake Island is inspired by Alice in Wonderland, no surprise there. In preparation for this video, I've reread Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, as well as Through the Looking Glass, the sequel, and did a quick reread of Whole Cake Island, which, by the way, is an excellent arc. I forgot how good it is. Bloated a little bit? Yes. A lot of it? Yes. Excellent though, amazing arc. Anyway, the goal of this series is not to say Oda took inspiration from other works, but to dig into those inspirations and be able to have that conversation that Oda opens up for us as far as the little nods to the original stories that he gives, as well as the thematic similarities, and really be able to go one step deeper into his story and appreciate how much intentionality he really puts into every step. I've already done a video on Don Quixote as well as Dante's Inferno, or the Divine Comedy, and today we're talking about Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. The most obvious inspiration that we have to talk about right off the bat is that of the physical appearance of the entire island. It looks like Wonderland. Everything is nonsensical, everything is crazy, everything is alive. In Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, it is a nonsense world. And there's even a line that Alice says while she's playing croquet with flamingos as mallets and hedgehogs as balls, that it sure would be more convenient if everything weren't alive and moving around all the time. This island has that very nonsensical, magical, exciting, and fun world dynamic where everything is alive. It has the standard One Piece, deeper, darker explanation for it all. Big Mom is literally taxing the citizens pieces of their soul to live there under her protection, and if they don't give it to her, then she'll kill them, and she's putting it in inanimate objects. We'll talk more about the thematic parallels to that later. But Whole Cake Island is also centered around candy and cakes and food in general. It's a magical candy land. And in Alice in Wonderland, food and drinks are a really big factor for her. And she does a lot of growing and shrinking throughout the two books. And that's largely centered around cake. Yes, there's a scene where she has to eat from two sides of a mushroom. And yes, there are a couple of drinks involved as well. But primarily cake is what's sprinkled throughout these two short stories. At the very beginning, she eats a cake. There are multiple instances where something really strange happens and then it disappears and a cake is left in its place. One of the most iconic scenes in Wonderland is at a tea party where cake is served, but also Big Mom is constantly having tea parties when she has meetings with other people, when she has the big wedding, when she throws the big wedding, they're all sitting around different tea party tables. Big Mom is constantly throwing tea parties as well, which again, we'll circle back to. Then you have all the little nods that Oda just kind of throws in throughout it, like the fact that we have a Humpty Dumpty in Whole Cake Island. We have a very fast rabbit that makes a sudden appearance. Tweedledee and Tweedledum are just hanging out in the background in one panel, which was like such a fun find. I didn't see that the first time I read through this arc. But also body proportions are crazy in this story. Constantly Alice is eating something and then her neck gets really long or her limbs get really long and body proportions just kind of go wild. Oda really flexes his character designs in this, and a lot of that it looks a lot like some Alice in Wonderland stuff. Not to mention that both the protagonist and antagonist of this arc, their size is played with a lot, and a lot of it is wrapped around food. Big Mom is naturally very large, in fact so large that as a child, whenever she goes to live on Elbaf, she actually feels comfortable and at home for the first time. The proportions are correct. But she also has a fixation on food and on cake in particular, and there is a part of this arc where she shrivels down because she doesn't have the cake to sustain her. Then you have Luffy, who goes through many body transformations in regards to food. At one point, he eats so much that he balloons up to a really big size, and then he falls asleep and gets back down to his normal size. Sleeping is also a big factor in Alice in Wonderland. And much like with Big Mom, when she refuses to eat anything but the cake and shrivels down, Luffy goes through the same arc where he refuses to eat anything but Sanji's eating and ends up shriveling down. Now, Big Mom has a lot of parallels with the Queen of Hearts in Alice in Wonderland. In Wonderland, the Queen of Hearts is a tyrant who rules with an iron fist. If you don't obey her instantly, then she goes into a rage and orders off with your head. There's actually a fun scene during the Painted the Roses Red scene where 3 of the cards bow down, and because their faces aren't showing, the queen can't, the line is, I wish I had underlined it. The line is, the queen, because she can't see the faces of the card, she can't tell if they're her guards, gardeners, subjects, or 3 of her own kids. Big Mom staffs her kingdom with her own kids. It's her children that are her guards, that are the leaders, that are the ones that get everything done in her kingdom. And I know that probably seems like a bit of a stretch, but Oda actually makes nods to this very thing throughout Whole Cake Island, like that several of Big Mom's kids actually have symbols, card symbols, tattooed on them. And Smoothie has a tattoo of a rose on her leg. And there are even scenes where there's no reason to show it, but the tattoo is in the foreground while other things are in focus. I know it seems like a stretch, but I'm a One Piece fan, so it's all I'm capable of doing. It feels like Oda is saying, yes, that's exactly what I'm doing by adding these tattoos to her own kids in reference to that scene. Also, this happens in Wano, but there is a scene where the Queen of Hearts puts someone on trial for stealing her tarts. She accuses them of stealing food from her and goes into a rage. Anyway, in Alice in Wonderland, the queen also has a king who is a small man who can't really give any sort of influence on his wife or calm her in any way. On to Through the Looking Glass. So Through the Looking Glass is the sequel. It's a little bit lesser known, but there's a lot of parallels here too. You can probably think some up off the top of your head without even having read it, assuming you haven't. But Through the Looking Glass starts off with Alice playing with her kittens, and then she observes that one of her kittens has the same marking as one of her chess pieces, and then she starts imagining as these 2 stories go. They're all imaginings / dreams. So Alice imagines that there's another world through the looking glass, and it is essentially a world of opposites where everything runs in the opposite direction and looks like a reflection. Then on impulse, she climbs up on the table or dresser, I don't remember now, and climbs through the looking glass, and now she's in this mirror world. In this mirror world, books are written backwards, inanimate objects have faces, chess pieces are walking around, and at one point she tries to get to a garden in the trees, and she ends up running in the opposite direction. The world through the looking glass is a giant chessboard, and there are chess pieces running about. And at the beginning of the story, the Red Queen tells Alice that she can play on the white side because the chess pieces are red and white. And she tells Alice that if she gets to a certain square, then she can become the new queen, the new white queen. And I just like that the queen of Whole Cake Island, Big Mom, is essentially playing a game of chess, trying to manipulate pieces and bargain and backstab in order to get her into a position where she can become the king of the pirates. Again, it's a bit of a stretch, but I'm a One Piece fan. Oh, there's also a scene where Alice learns that time runs backwards in Alice in Wonderland, or in the Mirror Land. So for instance, there's a man who's in prison. Next week, he'll be on trial, and after that, he'll commit a crime. And speaking of Sanji comparisons, at the end of this story, the Red Knight attacks Alice and the White Knight comes and saves her. And what are the key traits of this White Knight? He's very clumsy, therefore he doesn't play his role, the role that's expected of him, well. And he has a funny looking helmet that he tells Alice he made himself. I like that Sanji is kind of a White Knight character and that it was a helmet that kind of was a defining feature of Sanji's story. That could, I guess, be a coincidence, but it feels like a very specific nod to me. Okay, so those are the visual story parallels that we can pull, or at least some of them. I'm sure there's loads that I missed because really they're sprinkled everywhere throughout this story. But now I want to talk about the thematic parallels because I think that those are more important, and I think that there's a lot of intentionality that Oda put into this. Now, once again, Big Mom is a really great parallel for the Queen of Hearts. She runs a world that's full of joy and laughter and life. But how does she make that life? By stealing it from others and putting it into her island instead. By threatening and throwing tantrums, and by committing violence in order to put on these childlike, extravagant tea parties. Big Mom requires a tax of a person's soul in order for them to live there, but she also threatens, if you don't pay your tax, you're just going to die. I'm just going to take the entire soul. I'm going to take your entire lifespan from you. But at the same time, if a person, even her own child, doesn't directly obey her orders, then she's willing to snatch their soul from them and put it in an inanimate object that will then serve her. So either you serve her or your soul will be taken from you and given to something else that will serve her. Service is the only option. That's very much how the Queen of Hearts runs her kingdom. She will make orders like, I want those roses red, and if they're not met instantly, or if you don't agree with whatever she says, obey her smallest, wildest whim, then she will go into a rage, throw a tantrum, and commit violence in order to get her servitude. In many children's stories, there is a theme of growing up. A lot of classic stories intended for children would tackle the fear and disorientation of growing older and of leaving the realm of childhood. In Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, Alice falls through the rabbit hole and immediately everything is very different. Everything is changing. People are speaking in nonsense. She's commonly misunderstood, and she tries to recite her lessons, but they're getting jumbled and she just feels really overwhelmed. On top of that, there are characters that pop in just to give her morals, just to teach her how to be a better human, how to grow up, how to be more mature and adult-like. And throughout these stories, she becomes more comfortable in this very disorienting world. She figures out how to navigate it and she herself matures. So this is a theme in Alice in Wonderland. Big Mom is a character that never grew up. She never changed, she never adjusted. And in her, we get to see what it would look like if a child never grew up. I feel like what Oda did with Big Mom is he took that concept that's in a lot of child classics, that fear of growing up, that desire to never grow up, and he gave us an adult who was locked inside of a child's mind. Big Mom was a child that was abandoned and then taken in by an evil nun who validated her and who gave her love and found family. And Lilin was really happy at this point in her life. In fact, it was the happiest day of her life that she accidentally killed them all. Being rejected because of who you are, because you're too much, and then being taken in and accidentally causing harm to death to your newfound family is a really traumatizing experience for a child, which explains why Big Mom is locked in this childlike state in her mind still. She is an overgrown child. She is an adult that still tries to live in this fairy tale wonderland, that tries to make everything happy and exciting, that wants to throw constant tea parties, that wants to collect all of her people, all of her different species, that has a very shallow view on life and equality. And when she doesn't get her way, she stomps her feet and throws a tantrum. She is the depiction of what it looks like when you never grow up. I feel like Oda took this story that is a wonderland that's exciting and mystifying and a little bit scary and confusing. He put it in his world and he told his own story through it, but he also took this concept, this childhood fear of growing up, and in that he created a villain, someone who didn't grow up, and what a terror that looks like. Showing that this ideal of never growing up isn't actually a wonderland, it's a nightmare, not only for the person, but for everybody that has to serve under them, and for their children too. We see people who have grown up in this made-up, synthetic wonderland run by a tyrant who has never grown up, and we see how much that's affected them and in fact stolen their childhood, like Katakuri, who had to defend his sister because his mom wasn't emotionally mature enough to actually be a mom. We have some siblings who are actually afraid of their mom and who are only serving her because of this threat of death that they live under. And then we have Pudding, who is the perfect, in my opinion, example of the trauma that they're all facing having her as their mother, in that she has this massive identity crisis, doesn't know who she is, what she wants, and can't figure out how to even so much as take a compliment on something that she's for her entire life been mocked by and told. She's been told by other kids and by her mom that the third eye is ugly. Cover that up. And when she's shown just a grain of kindness, it unwinds her. She doesn't know what to do with herself. She doesn't know who she is or what her purpose is or what she's supposed to be doing anymore because she's been so traumatized by the environment, this fake synthetic wonderland that she's grown up in. But that's all it is. It's fake, it's synthetic, it's a terror land, not a wonderland. Which brings us back around to Sanji as well, who also has been raised in an abusive, unloving, authoritarian home. And that's a piece of the brilliance of Oda, is that he takes these inspirations, sprinkles in nods to that inspiration all throughout the story, makes these direct parallels, but then from those parallels, he uses it as a springboard to dig into the nuance of his own story and his own characters. So you have Big Mom, who we have an entire island and an entire ecosystem and kingdom that's built off of this concept that is coming from the story that Oda was inspired by. And from that, we have a direct parallel with one of our main characters of the story and how his experience is so similar, being raised in a similar environment, and how he was able to be shaped by that as well, but also break away from that and be saved from it. We get to explore the trauma that comes from being raised by someone so selfish that raises you only for their own ambitions and their own desires. And we get to explore that through Pudding, the daughter of the Queen of Hearts, as well as through Sanji, the White Knight. Not to mention that, as I've already said, food plays a huge role in Alice's adventures in Wonderland, in how she's able to navigate the world, as well as it's just constantly brought up and sprinkled all throughout these two stories. So in a story that has food, and specifically cake, at the center of it, Oda then does an arc that unpacks and elaborates on a character who one of his core motivations, passions, and personality pieces is his love for food and for feeding others. Food is a major piece of the one good thing he had growing up with his mom. Food is the major connector between him and his true father, Chef Zeph. Food is a huge part of his belief system and how he interacts with the world and with other people. Food is at the center of the resolution between him and Luffy, and him saying that he wants to come back to the crew. And food is a huge part of how Sanji plays a role in ending the arc of Whole Cake Island. It's through his core belief in feeding people. Whole Cake Island isn't an amazing arc because it's inspired by Alice's adventures in Wonderland. It's an amazing arc because Oda used this inspiration and springboarded off of it to make a story that's totally unique to him and that only reinforces the themes that are already in his story and the characters that he's already built up. But in these inspirations, it's never just this surface level thing that he does. It always digs deeper into the very core of what that story is. And I just really love unpacking that. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you happen to have read Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass and Whole Cake Island, and you have anything to add, any things that I missed, I would love to read it in the comments. Or if you just want to talk about it more with me, I would love to read that too. I post videos every Monday and Friday on this channel, Tuesdays and Thursdays on my review channel, which is always linked in the description of my videos. I'll see you again soon. Bye.